Okay, why don't we get started? As I said, my name is Tom Foster, and I'll be the moderator for today's call. And before we start the formal comments about today's call, I'd like to turn it over to Fred Barnstein. Fred is the founder, CEO, and president of TRAL, TPSU, TPMI, 401k TV, and one of the real legends in our industry. I'm very proud to have him on the call and be able to work closely side by Fred. So, Fred, if you'd like to make some opening comments, that would be great.
Thank you, Tom. And I wanted to welcome everybody to our weekly virtual town hall. And I hope everyone is staying safe, healthy, and as productive as possible. And I don't know about you, but usually I travel 2 or 3 weeks out of the month, and it is going to be very strange getting on an airplane again. I'm actually going to look forward to the lines on the security. I won't. What a privilege that is to do that. So I wanted. This is part of our continuing series of virtual town halls. We're very much used to doing things in person, and we're still planning on conducting TPSU programs again and trial programs in June. But until then, we're doing these weekly virtual town halls every Friday at 1. We are going to take off next week because of the Passover holiday and Good Friday. So our next one will be on the 17th. And we are also considering doing a virtual TPSU program right after, which will carry, between the two, carry up to 5 hours of CE for HR and financial professionals on that. So we're just in the process of applying for that. So stay tuned for that on the 17th. And we will be also conducting for advisors super CE sessions in about 3 weeks. We haven't done the date, where advisors can get 15 to 24 hours of CE credits. And it's just in the spirit of trying to have us all be as productive and connected as possible with the virtual town hall, the virtual TPSU programs, and the super CE sessions for advisors. So with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Tom, and really looking forward to hearing from our panelists and from Tom. And we have a great perspective from HR consultant, a plan advisor, and a record keeper and money manager, along with Tom, and the credibility he brings with almost 40 years of experience, as well as being an attorney and having really up on the CARES Act and the government resources that are available and growing and changing. So thank you, Tom, and I look forward to the call.
Thank you very much, Fred. And as Fred said, my name is Tom Foster. I'm now the Managing Director of the Trial Speaker Bureau. And I'm very privileged to have with me today 3 great panelists. As Fred said, we have an HR person, and Kimberly Prescott. And Kimberly is the president of Prescott HR from Columbia, Maryland. We're also joined by Joe Brummel. Joe is the Managing Director for Strategic Retirement Partners, CRP, in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. We're also joined by an industry veteran, very much like myself, John Doyle. He's a senior retirement strategist at Capital Group, the home of American Funds, and he's based in New York, New York. So again, welcome to the call. Now, this call today is based primarily on a lot of the information we garnered from last week's call, when we dealt with some of the industry experts that are helping mold some of the industry responses to this whole coronavirus 19 outbreak that we're all experiencing right now and trying to deal with in the best way we can. So what I thought I would do is to sort of have a level set for today's call. I'm going to give you sort of a review of what we've talked about last week, so that when we do get into some of these issues, you'll at least have some of the things that we've talked about last week that we can incorporate into our discussion today. Now, the entire call from last week is available on 401k TV. It'll get into a lot more of the details of some of the provisions and some of the expert insight that we gained from last week. But basically, last week, our first speaker was Michael Hadley. He's from Davis and Harmon law firm in Washington, D.C. He discussed the retirement provisions in the CARE Act. Some of the things he talked about were, first of all, a new category of loan called the coronavirus-related distribution, or shortened to CRD. Now, under this provision, a qualified individual could request a loan of up to $100,000. Now, who is a qualified individual, an individual person? It is someone who is diagnosed with SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 virus by a test that's approved by the CDC. It also applies to individual's spouse or dependent who is also affected by this virus. And thirdly, it applies to individuals who experience adverse financial consequences as a result of being quarantined, being furloughed, or laid off, or having work hours reduced as a result of the virus, and are unable to work also because of childcare due to such virus, or reducing hours of a business owned or operated by an individual due to this virus. Now, as far as the loan is concerned, there will be no 10% penalty. That would be waived. The loan can be, the tax on the loan can be spread over a 3-year period, and the loan can be paid back. And Michael got into a great amount of detail specifically around those loans. He also talked about the maximum loan amount. As you know, currently the maximum loan amount is 50% or $50,000. That has been increased to 100% or $100,000. Also, another thing he focused on was loan repayment, because obviously during this time of crisis, people are having a hard time paying their loans. Well, loan payments, again, most of these things we're talking about in the first part, which we'll also talk about today, only apply to the individuals that I mentioned previously. But the loan payment can take over 1 year. It can be paid back over a 1-year period. And also, when it does get paid back, it will be required to pay back any interest. So the loan would have to be re-amortized. Also, he talked about the suspension of the R&D for 2020. So that means both the people who are receiving a 2019 distribution by April 1st of this year and their 2020, that would be postponed for this year. It's waived for this year. You're still going to have to take your minimum as we go further down the road, but at least for this year, there's no minimum required. He also talked about some of the deadlines that are extended for some of the plans. Individuals, as you know, will have up until July 15th this year. Qualified plans and IRAs will have the same deadline. The one thing he did point out, which I think is very important, there is no delay on the refund of excess contributions. Those will still have to be refunded by April 15th. We next had Glenn Snyder from the Chamber of Commerce, and he primarily focused on paid sick leave and FMLA. And there are basically 3 phases of this bill. In phase 2, as far as paid sick leave was concerned, Glenn was kind enough to point out that there are 2 numbers that you have to understand, a 50 and a 500. If there's more than 500 employees, now first of all, what is this talking about? It's mandatory paid sick leave. If an employer has more than 500 employees, it does not apply because they figure that someone with more than 500 employees already has issues dealing with paid family leave and also sick leave. If it's less than 500, then the DOL is working on exemptions for those people because they feel that there's a monetary strain that's already being placed upon them at this point. But what happens between 50 and 500? Between 50 and 500, there will be a mandatory sick leave available. It provides for 8 hours of sick leave, and it's $511 per day with a $5,000 maximum. If you are taking care of a child and you cannot telenetwork, then that drops to $200 or $2,000 maximum. As far as family leave is concerned, there will be 12 weeks, and 2 weeks of which are unpaid, 10 weeks at $200 per day to a maximum of $1,000. Now, the only way you can take it is if you are taking family leave is if the school is closed or you're unable to get daycare. Next thing he talked about was unemployment insurance. And unemployment insurance is going to be extended for 13 weeks. And as you know, most states vary from 20 to 26. Well, now it's going to be extended for 13 weeks. So we got into a lot of information around some of the particulars relative to that. We next heard from Chris Gaston, and Chris is also with Davis and Harmon. He's a lobbyist for the firm. And he talked primarily about what was happening in Washington because strangely enough, as we were talking about the bill, when we started the call, we had anticipated that there was going to be some delay in Congress because of the Congressman Massey out of Kentucky. But as you know, right in the middle of our call, it passed, and he went over some of the strategical things that happened at that time. And then he also got into what he feels is going to be the likelihood that we'll see more phases of this bill in the future. He feels pretty confident that we will see another phase. And in that phase of the bill, it appears that some of the things that the Democrats compromised on this bill will be taken up in the next bill. So stay tuned for that. He also talked about the fact that, we as individuals right now, we're on this call, we're adapting to the virtual world. And so the question came up about what about the legislature? Do you think now that we have this public health issue, do you think they'll do the same? And he thought that they talk about it, but in realistic terms, he felt that the senators and congressmen really get their energy from interacting with their constituents and also interacting with each other on the floor. And that's how a lot of the bills come to fruition. That's where the bills are made. So although there's a possibility, he doubts that it'll actually come to fruition. Now, the next person we talked to was Peg Knox. And Peg was representing the SIA. The SIA is the Defined Contribution Institutional Investment Association. And she's got a very large organization. And she said that in looking at some of her members, she found that the majority of plan sponsors and participants really aren't concerned about retirement. Right now, they're more concerned about running their business and paying their bills and helping their employees. And the employees were of a similar mindset. And it said when it comes to plans, what many employers are asking about is, geez, is there a possibility I can freeze the plan or postpone making contributions? Now, her group is made up of 185 organizations, and they represent record keepers, consultants, advisors, investment managers, and law firms. So what I'd like to do right now is I'd like to put up a poll, and I'd like you to respond to who you turn to in this time of crisis. Who do you look for advice and guidance from? And as this poll is coming up, we'll take a couple seconds for you to go through it, and let me continue on with what Peg had to say. She also said that it indicated that her group, working with plan sponsors and the groups I just mentioned, they have various touch points. And each one of these groups has various ways that they communicate with their employees and their plan sponsors. And that's why we're going to get another perspective today from the two advisors who are on the call. She also said that those participants who are in target date managed funds, they should understand that their funds are being managed by professionals trained in how to react to volatility. She said the one group that we should be concerned about, and the primary focus today, are for all the participants who are nearing retirement. For all others, she emphasized the importance of not overreacting and changing to less risky investments, because if you're out of the market, she stressed, for just 10 days in an up market, that could have a long-reaching effect on your participants' portfolios. She also emphasized working closely with the members I mentioned and seek assistance whenever you're concerned. She also mentioned that the SIA also has a website that's completely devoted to COVID-19, and you can access by going to the SIA's website and pulling up those questions and some of the answers that her members have received. So let's take a look at the poll results right now, DJ. And as you can see, most people in time of crisis, when it deals with finances, are talking to their plan advisors, and I would think that to be the case, because the plan advisors are the ones that are in the trenches with them every single day, and so that's not a surprising poll to me. And I also think that if you were to dig deeper, I think many people will actually work with a combination of all of these, but at least this is the tone that we find from all of you on the call today. Also, if you're not able to, because of some technological issue, you're not required to participate in the poll, but we'd like as many of you to respond to it as possible so we can get a pretty good indication as to where we're going in this time of crisis. Now, speaking of time of crisis, one of the things, I'm going to ask you the first question, Kimberly. Now, we're all going through new experiences, our families, neighbors, friends, and in our businesses and plan sponsors, many companies are struggling, as you know, with just keeping the lights on. Currently, there are important conversations occurring in areas of reduction of force, reduction in working hours, and in some cases, reclassification of jobs. And Kimberly, you have roughly 2 decades of experience in HR leadership and director positions, and you are now and your team are consultants and assist clients with developing strong internal management and human resources structures during periods of organizational change. At firms such as Whole Foods, Maximum Healthcare Services, TEK Systems, Giant Food, and Paychex. We want to tap into your vast knowledge right now, Kimberly. My first question for you is, until we can emerge on the other side of this, would you describe for our audience the thought process and pitfalls of general reduction in workplace by way of terminations? Kimberly?
Yes. So there are a few things to think about, and there are a variety of ways to manage during this time. So employers are looking at either furloughs, layoffs, or a complete reduction in force. And I think it's important to understand the difference between those, because they have implications as it relates to the employer's responsibility to participate or comply with any of these most recent laws that have passed, as well as it impacts the employment relationship and therefore any benefits related to the employment relationship. So the first is the furlough. So a furlough is when there is a temporary reduction of hours or the reduction of the work week. And that could be reducing hours to 50% or 40%, or even reducing hours down to zero. And so many times when people think about a furlough, sometimes they use the word furlough and layoff interchangeably, but they are different.
Right.
Because in a furlough, the employment relationship remains. So individuals continue to be an employee of the organization. They are just working fewer hours, or for a temporary period of time, they are not working any hours. So that would be one option for employers during this time. And there are some implications that individuals, organizations need to think about as it relates to furlough. So some of that would be, identifying individuals that do need to continue to work and clearly identifying the amount of time that you need those individuals, as well as thinking about the implications of exempt versus non-exempt as it relates to the reduction of hours. A layoff, on the other hand, is a temporary separation of employment. So if you lay an individual off, you terminate them from your employment, but it is intended to be a temporary relationship, termination of the relationship. It is not intended to be long-term. And so typically when you do a layoff, you would say the amount of time that you expect for that layoff to last, and provide the separating employees with some documentation that would outline the intended period of time. Again, during that time, there is no employment relationship. The employee is terminated, and therefore any actions that would result from a termination of relationship would need to take place as it relates to benefits or anything else. A reduction in force is when you eliminate positions with no intention of bringing those individuals back. So that is when you terminate an individual or a group of individuals and you do not give a time frame and you do not plan on bringing those individuals back. Again, the employment relationship at that point is terminated as well. I think that those things are important because as we think about the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, the extension of FMLA, the emergency paid sick leave, all of those would depend on whether or not there continues to be an employment relationship. And again, as it relates to benefits or anything benefits related, the existence of the employment relationship would be an important factor.
Now, Kimberly, let me ask you another question relative to that. Now, you talked about furloughs, you've talked about layoffs, and of course, you've talked about the termination of employment. Are all three of those, or which of those are actually eligible for unemployment?
Technically, all of them. So if you have a significant reduction in hours under a furlough, you could qualify for unemployment depending on the number of hours that you work. So if you get reduced to a certain amount of hours or your furlough hours are zero, you could qualify for unemployment for the period of time that you are not working. Or if the amount of hours that you're working does not take you over the threshold that your state determines to be the threshold to qualify for unemployment, you could still get unemployment. Again, for layoff and for reduction in force, there is no employment relationship at all, and you would be eligible to apply for unemployment. It is important to note, though, that if an employee terminates and they do get some additional pay after the termination, so if you're paying out any severances, any sick pay, or any other leave related to the termination, that would impact when they would be eligible to start receiving payments from unemployment, but they would still be able to apply.
Okay, so if I receive severance as a result of termination, then I would not be able to collect unemployment during the period that severance pay was being paid. Is that correct?
That's correct. Under most state requirements, you would have to wait until, if your severance is covering you for 4 weeks of pay, for example, you could apply, you may get approved, but you may not start receiving payments until after that 4-week period.
Okay. Now, one last question. When cash is tight and payroll is looming, is it possible for an employer to convert salaried staff to hourly to reduce their hours?
That's a great question. It's actually a question that a lot of my clients have been asking. And so there are a couple of things to consider. So when you are paying someone a salary, you are paying them a salary in compliance with the Fair Labor Standards Act. And so the Fair Labor Standards Act gives us a three-pronged test to determine whether someone is eligible to be paid a salary. If you have an employee and you're reducing their hours and therefore you want to lower their salary, and quite honestly, for a salary person, you don't have to reduce their hours in order to reduce their salary. But if you do reduce their salary, you would want to make sure that it stays above the threshold of salary. So on January 1st, the Fair Labor Standards Act changed the threshold for an individual that would qualify for a salary. And so as long as they are above that threshold, you can continue to pay them a salary and you can just reduce their salary. I would not recommend converting someone to hourly. And the reason why is because part of the three-pronged test is the duties test. If those individuals are performing exempt level duties, then if you convert them to hourly, you could potentially jeopardize their exemption. So the best practice would be to lower their salary. Again, if you lower their salary and it falls below the salary threshold, then they don't qualify for a salary because of the salary threshold. But converting them to hourly purely for the fact that you don't want to pay them as much is not a best practice. The best practice would be to lower their salary. The other thing to note is that if you convert them to hourly, you have to pay them for all the hours that they work. If they work more than 40 hours, then you would then have to pay them overtime. So the best practice, again, would be to lower their salaries, and they can work as many hours as they need to work, and you would still only owe them that flat amount of salary.
Great. Well, thank you, Kimberly. Joe or John, do you have any comments to add to what Kimberly's told us?
I think Kim did a great job summarizing a lot of that.
Yeah, I actually
John,
do have one
comments?
question because I was on a call yesterday where one of the questions was around 1099 employees, that the new rules will actually allow them to apply for unemployment where in the past they haven't been able to. Is that true?
Kimberly?
Yes, 1099 independent contractors are able to apply for unemployment, and that is a change because previously it was just W-2 employees. But yes, they are qualified to apply. It's still unclear what documentation they will request to identify the amount that they qualify for, and also if they are waiving the requirement to look for work, and what does looking for work or a significant reduction of work look like. We're still waiting on some guidance for that.
And that's one of the things that Glenn Snyder from the chamber also talked about last week, John. So Kimberly's right on point. Now, Steph, why don't we put up the poll question relative to Kimberly's comments? Okay, now as we're looking at the poll and we're starting to get the results, Steph, do you have any questions from the audience relative to some of the comments that Kimberly has made?
Yes, I do, Tom. And just so everybody knows, anyone on the call can ask questions at any time. Just type in your questions and we will go through them. Question for Kimberly, and this is an interesting one, but if an individual has two full-time jobs that they work and they get laid off of one job or they get terminated on one job, can they still file for unemployment on that one job, even though they're fully employed on the other job?
Anyone is able to apply for unemployment. The questions that will be asked during the intake process would be, are you receiving any type of income and where is that income coming from? And depending on the amount of money that they're making from their other job, it may disqualify them, or the loss of the other income may qualify them for a partial payment. So all of those are decisions that are made by the state based on how they calculate, but ultimately anyone is eligible to apply. But the decision is going to be the state as it relates to how much or if they qualify.
Do you have any other questions from the audience, Steph?
Yes, one of, is there a good source on the internet where one can view the options and look at a flow chart on what you just described?
There are a lot of resources. There's not a lot of places that have them all in one place because different entities enforce each one of the regulations. So there are a variety of resources, the U.S. Department of Labor, the EEOC, a variety of them, but unfortunately there's not one place where you can find them all in one flow chart because they are enforced by different agencies.
Great. Thank you very much, Kimberly, and thanks for the questions from the audience. And I failed to mention at the beginning of the program, if you do have any questions of our panelists during this discussion, please use the chat feature on your computer, and we'd be happy to answer them as best we can. Keeping in mind that if we do have more questions that we're not able to answer, you will be able to, I would suggest, you'll be able to speak to your own advisor on some of these issues, check with your HR department at your place of employment, and use the various resources that Kimberly has referred you to. Now, we're next going to go to you, Joe Brummel. And Joe, we know that advisors like yourself are on the front line for any investment-related activity, both good times and not so good times, which we're currently experiencing. But before we do that, I just want to go to the results of the last poll. So hold on one second, Joe. We got the results coming up now. So you can see what percentage of your organization are furloughing or laying off, and it's pretty well in response for the no layoffs at all. Well, that's an interesting figure, and I'm glad to see that that's the case because I'm sure your employees are very happy about that result. So I think this is hopefully indicative of more employers around the country, but I think that's a good sign. Fred, you had a comment on that?
If I could just throw in a comment there.
Sure.
This is Joe. You know, we've talked to virtually all of our clients about their situation and where they're at. And the results or the impact of this situation is all over the board. We're very fortunate in that we have a very diverse client base of different industries, from manufacturing to retail, technology, medical practices, other professional practices. And the impact of this is all over the board. I was actually surprised to see that it was such a high percentage that are still at zero right now.
Right.
You know, we do have, I would say, the majority of our clients are at zero as far as layoffs, but some of those that have had to lay people off or furlough them or whatever, you know, they're doing. Kim's the expert in that area in terms of the terminology, but those that have had to do that, some have been very significant. We had a client that operates hotels, and a couple of weeks ago, their occupancy rate was already down to like 20%, and they were projecting, based on data that they had received from some very good sources in China, not from the government, that they were going to be down to 10% within about 4 days. And I believe that's about where they're at, and it might even be lower now. So, I mean, they had to lay off 65% of their staff 2 weeks ago. And then you see other companies, I mean, 2+ weeks ago, I mean, we had a client that was in the trade show business, and they basically sell trade show booths. Well, you can imagine what this has done for their business, and they had to lay off a good portion of their staff. So those that are affected can be affected very substantially. Those that are not, maybe it's business as usual, and there are actually some that are thriving. We have some clients that are doing well because of this in the right kind of industry, and some that are adapting, you know, retail, where they're saying, hey, why don't we do at store pickup, order it online, pick it up at the store. If they can do that, they can, you know, that keeps them alive.
Right. Well, you know, Joe, speaking of runs and good runs and bad runs, if you were to, you know, you look at the last 3 months, if you could remove the last 3 months, it has been an exceptional 10-year run. But right now, we seem to be in one of those not so good periods. And, you know, as far as you're concerned, Joe, you bring 25 years of industry experience, and you now are the managing director of investment firm Strategic Retirement Partners. During your 25 years in the retirement industry, you have been recognized as receiving awards and accolades from the 401k Wire, from Financial Times, Plan Sponsor Magazine, and others. Joe, we know you're a passionate advocate for helping plan sponsors, as we're seeing by your comments just now, and you build successful retirement plans and prepare participants for retirement. So the question I have for you is, when audiences want to hear what has been your approach to helping clients remain calm during this crisis?
Well, for some groups, emotions are high, and for some employees.
Right.
And like I was just giving you some examples, it's not there for everybody, certainly not yet. A lot of this emotion is driven by fear and uncertainty. And it's not just with the coronavirus, but it's with business and personal financial implications of this crisis. And our job as the advisor for our clients, and your first poll question really validated this. Plan sponsors are looking to the advisor primarily for guidance in difficult times like this, because it's our role to translate information and organize it in a way that they can process and make smart decisions from as quick as possible. That's not easy. You know, I mean, think about that. The CARES Act, what was it, 800 and some pages? I mean, that's a lot of information. And there's no shortage of information out there. If you want information, just grab your smartphone and Google it. The problem is, what do you do with it? And that's where, you know, we have tried to be as proactive as possible to help our plan sponsor clients and their employees translate this and make smart decisions from this. It's not easy, but we recognize this isn't the only thing on the plan sponsor's plate. You know, they've got a lot of other things they're doing, trying to keep the business afloat. They're running financial projections to see if they can keep the doors open and employees on payroll. You know, but the good news is this isn't our first rodeo. We've been through challenging times like this before, and we're trying to anticipate and provide the information and resources clients need before they even realize they need them. And I've had tons of conversations with clients, and it's so funny. They're like, "Hey, Joe, could you do this? You know, provide this kind of information." I'm like, "Yep, it's already in compliance review. We're going to have it out in the next day or two." And we've done a number of emails for plan sponsors, emails for employees, plan sponsor webinar. We did an employee video that we recorded, sent it out to help them kind of calm their fears about the market and, you know, just kind of reconnect to their personal values and goals so that they can neutralize the emotional factors and not make emotional reactive decisions that are not in their best interests. And probably the best thing, I think, is just making proactive client calls, asking how they're doing, verifying they're getting the emails, because quite honestly, spam catches some of that stuff. And so the calls ensure things go through. And then we realized we were creating so much good stuff, and yeah, our clients benefit from it, but why not make it available to everybody? So what we did is over a week ago, we built a landing page on our website so that this information is available. These resources are available to everybody, whether you're a client or not. And srpretire.com is our website. You'll see a new tab for COVID-19, and feel free to tap into some of this for both plan sponsors and for employees. And it's not just the obvious retirement plan stuff. Our company, SRP, was built as a virtual workplace. And I'm so thankful for that. I mean, in this time when many organizations are going virtual, we were already there. We already had the data security and the protocols all built around a virtual workplace. And so it's been business as usual in terms of how we operate, but now we're actually sharing that with others. And our COO and our managing partner, who helped build all this from the ground up, put together a really helpful video series that you can tap into on the website on working from home tips. And so we're really just trying to be proactive in helping people, plan sponsors, to do smart things and help their employees through this difficult time. And one other thing I'll mention is, in talking to people, it's not just about providing that information. What I've found has been really helpful is revealing blind spots, because all this information doesn't necessarily tell you what it's not telling you. There's the obvious information, but what are the blind spots in how you react to this? And when emotions are high, it's really easy to have the blinders on and miss those blind spots. And I'll use an example. a lot of the record keepers in the 401k and retirement plan business have been adopting the CARES Act provisions on an opt-out basis. And they're doing it with very short notice to clients. And so what we did is we reached out to clients as we've seen this, and to the extent we are notified that this is happening. Not every record keeper has been proactive in telling us in advance, but to the extent we find that out, we're reaching out to clients and giving them insights. An example of a client I talked to yesterday, their business hasn't been affected. And so by talking to them and letting them know you don't have to adopt these provisions if you don't want to, but you can. Or if you want to do it later, you can do it later. I don't think that's obvious in the information being sent out, that there's options beyond just what's on the menu that's being sent to them.
Right. And I think the other thing too, Joe, is that, typically where you're going to amend the plan, it has to be done by the last day of the plan year. But as you know, for the 3 provisions that we talked about relative to CARES, that can be done right up until the end of December of 2022. So they give them time. Yeah. So your point is you can do it right now, but you don't have to actually formally amend your plan till a later date. So I see a lot of the record keepers going to that opt-out provision that you just mentioned. And the other thing you brought up, which I think is important, Joe, is the fact that when I spoke to my own advisor, I asked him if he was getting a lot of calls. He said no, because he already had set the expectations for clients. He had put them in such a way that, he explained to them what was going on throughout the entire time period that this was all going on. I think that's a similar approach that you're taking in your firm.
Very much, very much.
And Joe, you also mentioned that, this isn't your first rodeo. How do you compare that with the experience you had in 2008?
Well, this decline compared to 2008 is more sudden. We'll see if it's as prolonged. The market downturn was more significant, but it was over a prolonged period then. I would equate this situation to being a little bit more like 9/11 in some respects. And I've been saying that for a few weeks, in that it was caused externally and it was very much unexpected. And with 9/11, it helps to have some perspective that when that occurred, the markets recovered within 3 months. And I don't have the exact days, but I just remember it really well. And it changed the way we lived in profound ways. You don't walk up to an airport, gate to greet your relatives coming in from somewhere anymore. You got to go through all the security stuff. And people changed other things. My wife and I got married just before 9/11, literally got back from our honeymoon 5 days before 9/11. We lived in Boston, and when 9/11 happened, we just stopped and said, hey, you know what? We were planning on moving back to the Midwest at some point. Why don't we just do it now? And we did that, and that's when I went on the advisor side of the business. So I think go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'll let you finish that comment. We're going to move on. Go ahead.
I was going to say that this is going to have a profound impact on people's lives today, and I think we're just starting to imagine how it's going to change things, how people are going to interact, how it's going to change the way we do business, and having some of this distancing and the option to work from home. Those are important things. And when you're, as a plan sponsor, when you're thinking about how this is going to change what you're doing with your retirement plan, it's going to have an impact. It's going to impact how you look at your service providers. Did your service providers hold up during this stress test? That's what you should be asking right now. But coming out of this, on the other side, you're going to be asking some different questions about, will these providers be prepared for the next pandemic or whatever issue it is? It may not be exactly the same, but it's probably going to rhyme. And here's a good example I'll just share with this is, I was dealing with my bank last week, and it was, we're doing some stuff that I started back in January. And, my banker is working from home. And so the banker said, well, Joe, we need some more documentation. Can you send us this, this, and this? I said, yeah, no problem. And she said, well, just email it over. when you've got it. And I said, whoa, time out. Okay. I know you're working from home, but don't you guys have some secure email or a secure portal to do that? Because I'm not just sending these documents with all this information, private information, over email. And she said, yeah, that's a good point. And I said, I've got secure email. I can send it through my work email. And she's like, oh no, I've got it. And so we sorted that out, but she let her guard down because she was working from home.
Yeah, well, it's a brave new world, and we have to learn to adapt to it. And I think, as you said, there probably will be another crisis somewhere down the road, but the people that learn to adapt and move on are the ones that will be successful. Well, let's take a look at the poll question relative to your specific comments, Joe. It says, what percentage of employer contribution is being suspended as a result of this crisis? And as we're looking for the results, Steph, do you have any questions specifically for Joe?
There is one here, and that is, how does this crisis compare with what you experienced in 2008? And I assume that's from an equity market standpoint.
Yeah, I just
that's answered that one.
Well, from the equity standpoint, yeah.
From the equity standpoint, yeah.
Yeah, it's more 2008 was more significant and than this one so far. But this one was very quick.
Right. Okay, well, let's go to the results of the poll. If you could pull that up, DJ. Okay, again, interesting results. The fact that, 80% of you are not suspending contributions at all. So, again, I think a lot of this information, the CARES Act just passed last week. So I think it's going to take time to digest all of this. And it'll be interesting if we come back in another month and see if these percentages are the same. But let's move on with the next questions for John Doyle. And John, your career has spanned 33 years, very much like my own. And you've held positions such as Executive Vice President, Chief Marketing Officer, and Vice President of Marketing at firms such as Fidelity, T. Rowe Price, Hartford Investment, now Senior Retirement Strategist at the Capital Group, home of American Funds. Your knowledge of investments and the overall retirement plan industry is extensive. So I would like to drill down on target date funds with you. Although target date fund analysts or analysis may not be an immediate priority for all plan sponsors, the plan fiduciary needs to act with prudence in carrying out their fiduciary responsibility. What should a retirement committee do what they should be doing and monitoring and measuring? How should the committee be evaluating the plan suite of target date funds to demonstrate that they are actually fulfilling their retirement duty relative to prudence? So what are you hearing, John, and how would you answer that question?
So thanks, Tom, and that's a great question, and kind of supported by what Joe and Kimberly have said. It's not a priority right now. The priority, of course, is the organization, the viability, the cash flow, and even the retirement plan decisions that are being made have to do with cash flow into the organization to figure out what they can and can't do. So when I'm talking to a lot of plan sponsors, they are paying attention. They do want to know how their target date suite or their QDIA is doing, but they understand that knowing it and doing something about it right now are two completely different things. So what I've basically been talking about is when the opportunity comes up to talk to a plan sponsor, say, okay, you understand what's going on, but let's take a step back and wait until the dust settles. And then once the dust settles and we have a better understanding of what the immediate future might look like, use this experience, use the data of what the plan has done, the participants and the investment manager, almost as a case study to go back and kind of look at the investment options, look at the target date fund or whatever you're using as a QDIA, and probably more importantly, what's been the participants' reaction and what have they done? So there are kind of three areas that I like to plan on focusing on and kind of set the stage for what the discussion might be in a month, 2 months, 3 months, whenever we have the opportunity. And first of all, and I'll get into each of these in a little bit more detail, but did your QDIA, did your target date fund do what you expected it to do? Because they're all different. You may have decided to go aggressive, moderate, or conservative. What was the result, and how do you feel that worked? Did you get value for the fees that you're paying? You may have made a decision based on on cost and the actual fees, or you looked at other aspects, so active or passive? How did you make that decision, and is it working the way you wanted it to? And then also, what did your participants do? And I think this is going to be one of the most important things as we go back and look at this crisis within the retirement plan, is what was the behavior of the participants, both for the target date fund, but for the other investments in the plan as well. So kind of going back on those on each of those three, and we all know that not all target date funds, not all QDIAs are created equally. And it's important to understand and match that target date decision that you've made with the objective of your plan and what you want to achieve with the QDIA and with the investment lineup that you offer in your plan. And what I'm finding going back is many of the committees, when they made the decision, and the decision may have been made, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, they made the decision either based on price or they made it based on short-term investment results. And now they're a little surprised at where they ended up. That, now we've gone through, we've spent at least 10 years hypothetically imagining what participants will do in a crisis market like this. Now we actually have real data, or we will have real data, and we'll have a good understanding of what we should expect from participants and be able to adjust the objectives of the plan, the objectives of the individual QDIAs or investment options within the plan. And that, I think, is going to be extremely valuable data going forward and will allow us to actually make moves that can improve outcomes for the plan, outcomes for the participants, based on both objectives and actual participant behaviors and an understanding of what they might do. So as we get through the crisis and the dust settles a little bit, but in the near future, meaning as a fiduciary, you can't ignore your responsibility to pay attention to the investments. There are other priorities now, but make sure that when you have the opportunity as a fiduciary to make decisions, that the fiduciary decisions are being made on behalf of the participant. And if there's overlap between the committee and business decisions being made around cash flow, make sure you understand which hat you're wearing when you're making those decisions. But looking back at those three things, talk to the advisor. I mean, we saw earlier in the poll how important the advisor is to the plan sponsor and being a real source of knowledge. So talk to your advisor and get some guidance on how best to proceed to address these issues in terms of whether or not your QDIA, your target date fund, is doing what you wanted it to do. Because not all target date funds are the same, when you look at a target date fund relative to, say, an industry benchmark, the objective of the target date fund is not to beat that benchmark under all circumstances. It's to be in a position relative to that benchmark depending on economic circumstances. So for example, in a market like we've seen really for the last 5 or 6 years where risk was rewarded and markets were taking off, you would expect that the more aggressive funds would do better than an industry benchmark or an average benchmark that might be out there. And at the same time, a more conservative approach would probably lag some of their peers in that type of market that was rewarding risk. So your expected return for your decision is fairly high. But at the same time, when you go through a crisis like we've gone through, the expected return that you would have for your target date fund on an aggressive path would actually be below market and lag the peers. And if you're okay with that, because that's the objective of the plan, then meeting those expectations through actual results is a good thing. But that's one of the analyses that you're going to go back and do now that we'll have this data when you have an opportunity to do it. Did your target date fund do what it said it would do? And also look at, what are your objectives? Is it important for you to offer a moderate or conservative approach, or are you comfortable being more aggressive because you feel that works best for your plan objectives and the understanding, maybe the level of sophistication that your participants have? Understand the trade-offs of the risks that you're taking. If you do take a more conservative approach, are your participants going to be ready for retirement if they've been in a conservative fund for 5 or 10 years or in truth, 20 years before retirement? So understand that trade-off, that yes, they get more in good markets, but they're going to fall more in volatile markets, and look at the volatility of the portfolio. The other thing I find in talking to a lot of sponsors is kind of an understanding of how to measure the risk that they're taking, because it's not just market risk. It is also longevity risk and making sure that participants are going to have enough to retire on when they do retire. And I find sometimes that we oversimplify how we measure risk, and that rather than look at things like standard deviation and volatility and the likelihood of hitting certain objectives, it comes down to a simple how much stock is in the target date fund. And that's probably not a good proxy for risk, given the different managers that are out there and the way they manage their target dates and the way they may manage each asset sleeve within the target date. So now we're talking about real data, the ability to look at how the funds have done relative to expectations and what the participant behavior was in the crisis. Because if you believe that aggressive is the right approach to take, and we find out that 30% of participants couldn't handle that volatility and sold out of their QDIA at the wrong time, then we have to go back and revisit that. And as a fiduciary, you should be looking at possibly making some adjustments to the lineup or adjustments to the approach that you have. So once we've been able to garner all of this information, actually look at behavior, look at the expected results of the QDIA, then might be an opportunity to go back and say, okay, let's revisit the QDIA decision and make adjustments if we deem them necessary. But it's not something that should be done emotionally, as we've talked about already. It's not something that is a priority at a time when the markets are as volatile as they are, because I think we have to see really what participants do over the long term. So I think we'll have that opportunity to kind of look back and understand how we're going to make these plans better. Did the target date, this is the other thing I'm really interested in seeing is the difference in participant behavior between participants that are in the target date fund, whether they've been defaulted or opted in themselves, and those that build their own portfolio or have a professionally managed portfolio. Because my expectation is that a lot of the trading we're seeing today is not people leaving the target date fund, it's people trying to adjust their portfolio to current market circumstances. So I'm looking forward to seeing whether that hypothesis is true and how they do relative to the professionally managed. And I think that will then inform plan sponsors and the fiduciaries on how they should structure the plan, how they should promote or not the target date fund or the QDIA or any professional advice and professionally managed investments within the portfolio. How did the do-it-yourselfers fare relative to the target date fund participants? And then kind of building on that, being able to look at the underlying fund lineup, and are you providing the right funds for those do-it-yourselfers to actually build their own portfolio? And so I think those 2 or 3 things are what we're going to get out of this once we have the actual data. And that's where a plan sponsor, that's where the committee can actually start to look at making a real difference to participants going forward based on the investments in the QDIA and the investments available in the core lineup as well. So I'd like to turn it back over to you, Tom.
Yeah, I think that's very sound advice. Your advice is, don't do this in a time of panic. Let the dust sort of settle. Re-identify and readjust what your goals and objectives are, and then after that, sit with an advisor like yourself, John, work out the game plan, and then proceed accordingly. So I think that's good advice. And let's see what the poll question is relative to your specific comments, Joe. So as a result of the current manager volatility, our organization, and you have those choices. So as you take a look at those choices and complete the poll, Steph, do you have any last questions for Joe? Because we're coming to the end of our time allotment.
Yes, question for John, and this has to do with plan sponsors themselves, but what are you hearing from the plan sponsors as being their highest priorities and concerns relative to the retirement plan?
So I think they're looking at their immediate need to address their participants in the plan. What should they be telling participants now? What type of communication plan do they have in place that they can go out to participants and reinforce the message to stay the course? And I think the other thing that's important is the plan sponsor, the committee, actually has to meet and at least show, document that they're meeting and show that they are worried and paying attention to the immediate concerns of the participant, which is their fiduciary responsibility, and then have a plan in place to address it. So that's the number one priority. Then second, they're looking at some of these decisions they need to make around the CARES Act. What should they implement? What shouldn't they implement? I saw a survey this morning that less than 50% of plan sponsors intend to implement all of the provisions of CARES. So we'll see what happens there. But those are the priorities right now in terms of what they should be doing with their plan.
Great. Thank you very much, John. And let's take a look at the results of that poll, DJ. So you can see that the results of this poll, and rather than myself comment on it, John, what are your views on the poll results that you see in front of you right now?
I'm actually a little surprised that there's even 29% reviewing the investments right now, unless it was already scheduled. So, I mean, we're going ahead with our reviews, and we're going ahead with some very high-level updates on how the funds have done through the crisis. So I do understand that. But I think that the other thing, the bottom one, that have made changes in the process, again, if they were already scheduled, I think it's important to maybe revisit depending on timing, because you don't want to lock in losses. And if with the markets down, I think it's important to give the market an opportunity to turn around. But if things are already scheduled, there's no reason to stop without doing it, as long as you're comfortable that it's not going to adversely impact participants.
I had the same reaction as you, John. And the one thing I think is going to happen coming out of this, to add to some of the comments you had about target date funds, is there's going to be a lot more attention on the safety features rather than the speed. So if you think of your target date fund as a vehicle that gets you to and maybe through retirement, the focus in the last number of years has been how fast can this go? How much return can we get out of this vehicle? And there wasn't as much attention paid to the safety features, like, do you have airbags? Are your brakes working? Nobody cared about that until all of a sudden you need them. And now I think people are going to pay attention to those other features of the target date funds, and there's a lot to it.
No, I agree, and we've been talking for years about that downside protection and how important it is across the board.
Well, unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time. I really appreciate all the comments for today and all the questions. I want to thank the panelists. I want to thank, as you can see on the board, I want to thank Kimberly. I want to thank Joe and thank John. I think your comments were really very well accepted, and we hope the plan sponsors listening to today's call will take some of the advice that you've given them today. I'd also like to thank all of you on the call. Thank you for taking time from your busy schedule to take part in this, and hopefully it was helpful and also guide some of the principles that you'll be living under this time of crisis and going forward. So if you have any other questions or information, you can email us to the virtual town hall at tpsuniversity.com. Our next, as Fred said earlier, our next town hall meeting will be on April 17th. But again, I hope all of you and your family stay healthy, stay safe, and I hope that when we come out the other side of this crisis, we can all get on with our normal lives, and I hope that's the case. So again, thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you on another upcoming call. Have a nice day, everyone.